Welcome, everyone. I am Allison Sekuler. I'm the Chief Scientist and President at the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education, as well as the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. And it's great to see you all here. I want to introduce a couple of our panelists and our special guests. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rachel Savage. She is a scientist at the Women's Age Lab and at Women's College Research and Innovation Institute, Women's College Hospital. And she leads research focused on social connection and health system use in older adults with a sex and gender lens. Rachel, welcome. Joanne Murphy is another panelist. She is a retired teacher and has participated in an advisory role in several different research projects. And we're looking forward to hear Joanne's thoughts on a whole range of topics. So Joanne, welcome to you as well. And I want to introduce our spotlight guests, Dr. Adriana Schnall, who is the program director for the Kashitsky Center for Innovations in Caregiving here at Baycrest, as well as Dr. Larissa McKetton, who is the director of scientific and clinical development at the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education. Adriana and Larissa, welcome to both of you as well. Before we go on, I want to be sure that we thank our funders for this webinar and for all of the work that we do in the Defy Dementia program. That is the Slate Family Foundation, as well as Baycrest and the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, otherwise known as CABI. And we want to remind people that there is a webinar format that we're having, but we're going to add in a couple of fun polls for the different kinds of things that we're doing. We just ask that you keep your mics muted and your videos off. And the webinar presentation will be recorded, but not the question and answer session. So we ask that you turn up your volume on your computers, particularly because we're going to be sharing some videos with sound, and that will help you hear it a little bit better. And we also want to just make sure that you know that the webinar provides informational content about dementia prevention strategies, and it's not meant to be a substitute for medical guidance in any way. There are some icons you'll see at the bottom of your screen for the webinar. CC is for closed captions, so click on that if you want to see the closed captions. Chat, click on that if you have any technical assistance questions, problems hearing or seeing us, for example. And then Q&A is for any questions that you might have, and we're going to have some designated time for Q&A toward the end. Now, just to remind everyone what the objectives are for today. We want to make sure that by the end of this webinar, you appreciate that individuals' dementia risk can be modifiable. We want you to be able to differentiate between loneliness and social isolation. We want to make sure that you can identify factors that can contribute to loneliness. And we want to make sure that you've had a chance to learn from our experts about the strategies that you can use to reduce your dementia risk as it pertains to loneliness. So we're going to start off by just reviewing what is dementia and what are the risk factors, and also how loneliness can impact your risk and how to take action. And then we're going to share a few ways on how to combat loneliness and social isolation to reduce your dementia risk. And then later you're going to have a chance to ask us all questions. So first of all, what is dementia? You've probably heard about dementia in the past, and sometimes there's a little bit of confusion because people have also heard of something called Alzheimer's, and they think that maybe they're the same thing. Well, dementia is actually a general term. It's an umbrella term, we say, for a number of different kinds of collections of symptoms of different kinds of disorders that can affect the brain. Alzheimer's is the most common, the most prevalent. It accounts for 60 to 70% of all dementia cases. But the others account for 5 to 10% of the cases each. And it's actually the case that usually someone has a mixture of all of the above. So you might have some memory loss, you might have some mood disorders and so on. When it gets to a point that it's having an impact on your everyday life, that's when it might move, from example, from being called something like mild cognitive impairment to something being called dementia. So it's really a collection of different sorts of memory symptoms, clinical symptoms, memory being one of the ones that people know the most, but there are others. It could be attentional deficits, it could be mood disorders, it could be perceptual problems and so on. And right now, there are about 50 million people around the world who have been diagnosed with dementia. And what we say is around the world, every 3 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is being diagnosed with dementia. Now, here in Canada, we have also an increase, as you can see in the current slide. You've got an increase in the number of dementia cases that are coming online. And what you see is here, year is along the bottom. So 2024 is highlighted there as the first sort of thing. You can see that's about where we are with about 750,000 cases of dementia here in Canada. And that is projected by the year 2050. So over the next, say, 25 years or so, that's projected to increase to almost 2 million, 1.75 million in just 25 years. Now, when you think about dementia, often people think, well, my grandmother had it, or my grandfather had it, or my mom or my dad, and so that means I'm going to get it too. And our first question to you is, what percent of a person's dementia risk do you think is due to modifiable risk factors? Those are risk factors that you've got some control over. So your lifestyle, or things that you can control, your risk for things like diabetes and so on. What percent do you think that is? Is it 5%? Is it 25%? Is it 45%? And this is going to give us sort of a baseline for how we're talking about what those risk factors are with everybody. So what you can do is enter in your answer by clicking on that poll, and then we'll be able to sort of see what people think. The kind of modifiable risk factors that we're talking about are the things that are shown on the orange side of that slide. So things you can't really change is the sex that you're born with, the age that you have, and your genetics. So those are things that you can't change. They are all risk factors. There are some other things that you can change or modify either early in your life or later in your life. And that might be, for example, how much education do you have early on, and also how much do you continue with throughout your lifespan. In the middle of your life, some of the more important modifiable risk factors include things like high blood pressure, hypertension, high alcohol intake, obesity, hearing loss, traumatic brain injury, and what we call high LDL cholesterol. You might have heard a good kind of cholesterol and a bad kind of cholesterol, and the LDL is the bad one. And then later in life, some of the risk factors are smoking and depression, things like social isolation, physical inactivity, air pollution, which for people who are experiencing more forest fires and so on, that's a huge issue for people right now, diabetes and vision loss. The ones that are in orange there are new factors that were identified by a study that's the premier study in this field called the Lancet Report. And every couple of years, they report on the research that has been done that shows these are the risk factors that may be able to modify your overall risk for dementia. And when the evidence is strong enough, then they add it to this list. And so high LDL cholesterol and vision loss, untreated vision loss, those are two of the risk factors that were just added in last year's update to that Lancet study. So do we have an answer to the poll? Yes, we do. So about 5% of people, about 6% of people thought the answer was 5%. About 47% of people thought it was 25%, and about 47% of people thought it was 45%. It's about half and half thought it was either 25 or 45. And what that means is that we're going to teach you something for at least a good chunk of you. It turns out that at least 45% of the risk factor for dementia, we believe, can be modified by changing lifestyle approaches. So the modifiable factors that I just mentioned actually account worldwide for at least 45% of a person's modifiable dementia risk. Dementia risk. It turns out things like genetics, which everyone thinks sort of drives everything, that only accounts, depending on the kind of genetic, it can account for up to, say, 7%. But the things that you have some control over, much, much more important than many people might understand it to be. So in this case, one of the things we're going to be focusing on today is one of these particular risk factors, which I mentioned, which is social isolation and loneliness. And for that, to talk a little bit more about it, I want to turn things over right now to Dr. Rachel Savage, who's going to fill us in on what is this risk factor and what can we do about it. So Rachel, over to you.
Thanks so much, Allison. So first, we're going to start with a poll, again, to kind of understand your knowledge on the topic of loneliness and social isolation. We often hear these terms interchangeably used, but do they mean the same thing? So you should have another poll that popped up on your screen asking you if loneliness and social isolation mean the same thing, true or false. So you can select your choice, and we'll just give it a couple minutes and then have a look at the responses. Oh, well, maybe I have less to teach you than than Allison, because most of you are correct that loneliness and social isolation do not, in fact, mean the same thing. So that's wonderful to hear and see that so many people are starting to learn more about these two concepts. So, loneliness is a feeling. It's a subjective experience. It's a painful and unwanted feeling. I think most of us have experienced at least once throughout our lifetime. And it happens when we have a mismatch in the relationships that we have and those that we desire to have. So, either the number of relationships we have or the quality of the relationships, or both. Whereas social isolation is the objective state of having few contacts with family, friends, and community. And I think we often can understand intuitively the differences, even though these concepts of course are related. So if you are isolated, you're more likely to have feelings of loneliness, but that you can experience them independent of each other. So most of you will have heard the phrase alone in a crowd, and that really speaks to the experience of feeling lonely even though you're not socially isolated. There's lots of people around you, but you still, maybe at a party, maybe at an event, don't feel like where you are right there feels like you're having meaningful connections and relationships with people that are aligned with what you're desiring. So maybe to move on, I think one thing that people often are surprised to learn when I start speaking about loneliness in Canada is how common it is. I think when you feel lonely, it's an experience that makes you feel like you're the only one that feels that emotion. But in reality, many people feel the same way that you do. So this is a graph showing data from the 2021 Commonwealth Fund's International Health Policy Survey on older adults. So those are people aged 65 years of age and older. And you can see that overall, more than a third, so 37% of older Canadians report feeling isolated or lonely, often or at least some of the time. You can also see that we're higher than the Commonwealth Fund average. Actually, unfortunately, in Canada, we ranked the loneliest of all countries, 11 developed countries that were surveyed as part of this initiative. You'll also notice that the prevalence of loneliness is higher in women at 43% compared to men at 30%. And this is a pretty universal phenomenon that we see in other parts of the world, in other studies, in other surveys. And it comes down to several factors, a lot of which we're still trying to understand, because often men and women aren't studied separately in studies on loneliness and on social isolation. But we know some of it might come down to reporting and social norms around expressing our feelings and admitting to feelings of loneliness. And we know that women are more likely to admit feeling lonely than men. But there are also a lot of unique experiences that women share that put them at higher risk. So One is that females on average have a longer life expectancy than males. And so women in their later years are more likely to experience prolonged periods of widowhood, living alone, and multimorbidity. All of these are risk factors for loneliness. Women are also more likely to be influenced by some of the sociocultural factors, more likely to engage in caregiving responsibilities, have lower income, and I'd mentioned earlier, greater tendency to acknowledge feeling lonely. And so these are some of the reasons why we think that we observe that women report higher rates of loneliness than men. One of the reasons why I first got into this subject area of research was a series of focus groups that I conducted with older adults who were retired teachers. And we talked a lot about priorities for aging. And I think one thing that really stood out for me was how important maintaining social connections are for older adults as they age, one of their top priorities, right up there with maintaining their health, but how challenging it can be in light of changing circumstances and all the different life transitions that can accompany that period of life. So things like widowhood, retirement, having to maybe move residence, changes in health. And this is a quote I wanted to share because I think it really highlights the experience of loneliness, especially for women who do have that longer lifespan. So this woman said, I have a frame of university friends. At graduation, we all took each other's pictures, and I so proudly put my 4 friends into a frame, and 3 of them had died. So I look at that and I think, where are all my close friends? They have all died, the long-standing friendships that were so important and are gone.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's good to have that overall description, even though many people knew that there might be a difference between loneliness and social isolation. I think you really clarified for people exactly what that difference is and what some of these different contributing factors might be. And we're going to talk in a little bit more about some of the approaches that people can take to be able to reduce their risk of dementia from loneliness. And that's really part of what we're trying to do in general in the Defy Dementia program. The Defy Dementia program is all about helping Canadians and others make changes that they can to reduce their risk for dementia or to slow the progression of the disease if they've already been diagnosed. We originally received funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada to create Defy Dementia. And as I said before, we're now funded for the continuation of the program, including this webinar by the Slate Family Foundation, with some support as well from Baycrest and Cabby. Now, in its most pure form, Defy Dementia is a podcast that's produced by Baycrest and Cabby that is dedicated to helping you reduce your dementia risk. It's hosted by me and co-hosted by my good friend Jay Ingram, who is one of Canada's leading science journalists. And to date, we have released 20 episodes. We're going to share a link to the podcast for you toward the end of the session, as well as additional resources. And for people who haven't listened to a lot of podcasts, we try to make it as easy as possible. So if you do listen to podcasts, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts or anywhere. But we also have a website, and you can just go there and you can click on it and listen to it directly from the website. So that's easier for some people. Now, the podcasts are supplemented with additional resources that have key messages from the topic of that podcast. So each podcast typically will focus on one topic. It might be loneliness or social isolation, as we did in one of our early episodes. And in that one, what you might hear is somebody with lived experience talking about their own experience with loneliness and social isolation. And then we hear from a scientist or a researcher, a clinician who's listened to that story and then talks about the science of how does that risk factor impact your brain, and what can you do? What are some steps that you can take to reduce the impact of that risk factor on yourself? So just as one example, in our episode on loneliness and social isolation, we heard from a woman named Myrna Norman, who had been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia 15 years ago. When she was first diagnosed, she was told she had 5 years to live. And as you can imagine, this destroyed her. And she, in her words, she curled up into a cocoon and she really didn't want to interact with anybody. And then she realized after a while that, you know what, if I only have a little bit of time left, I don't want to live by myself in this cocoon. I want to break free, in her words, and spend time with her grandchildren, with her husband, with her kids, with her friends. And so she burst out of the cocoon and she started a group for people with dementia and their caregivers to be able to interact with each other. It's called the Purple Angels, and it's now based in British Columbia, but there's other chapters across Canada and around the world. As I said, that was 15 years ago. So, and we've had Myrna join us for a number of different Defy Dementia events. And I can tell you, she is very much with us still. And she's having the time of her life. And she really credits a lot of that to realizing that social interaction was important. So, in having that discussion, and hearing about what Shiva says, it helped us to figure out like what is it that we wanted to put into the infographic. So the infographics kind of take all of the information from the podcast and put them into a sort of a visual summary. So you'll see here a couple examples of the infographic actually from our social isolation and loneliness episode, which we co-developed, through discussion with Myrna and experts and others, as well as one of our other infographics, which here is showing the impact of exercise on your brain and how exercise can be used. You might notice a difference between the two. In addition to the topic difference, one is in English and one is in French. So if you want a visual summary instead of listening to the podcast or in addition to it, you can save these from the website, you can print them out, you can share them with others. And again, if you want to practice your French, because learning a second language is also good for your brain, you can read them in English and in French. Now, we've also created short animated videos that summarize each podcast, and we're going to watch one of those together. So as a reminder, just please make sure that your audio is turned up.
From smiling and waving at a neighbor to chatting with a grocery store cashier, social engagement builds relationships and community.
When we're socially isolated, we may feel lonely, but we can feel lonely even in a room full of people.
Not only are loneliness and social isolation painful, they diminish the brain and increase dementia risk by as much as 50% in older adults. In fact, loneliness and social isolation can be as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
However, it's never too late to take action and decrease your risk. If you or someone you know is isolated or feeling lonely, try small steps to connect with others. Do some errands in person instead of online. Join a book club or volunteer in your community.
Social activities you enjoy can build your brain and reduce your risk of dementia.
So for many of the episodes, as I've said, we have the podcast, we have infographics, we have a video, we also have a whole list of different kinds of resources and summary. So no matter what way you prefer to get your information, we can kind of make sure that you yourself are having that personalized learning experience. So what can you do to take action if you are feeling lonely or you're socially isolated and you want to be able to address that issue to change that part of your lifestyle to reduce your dementia risk? Well, you might have heard some of those in the video, but just to remind you, you can start off with some small steps. So depending on where you are, you don't have to do everything all at once. You can start by, for example, just trying to connect more regularly with your friends and family. Give someone a call once a week. Any little step that you're taking is taking you in the right direction. Through the pandemic, especially, a lot of people moved toward being online for a lot of things. And sometimes that's really helpful. Like when we're on this kind of webinar, we can reach a lot of people that we might not be able to if we were all in person. But, if all you're doing is spending time ordering your groceries online or shopping online, as opposed to having interactions with people online, maybe you can do a little bit offline. Maybe you can go back into the real world. So if you go shopping in person, when you're shopping, you're interacting with people, including the cashier, but others that you just bump into. So just taking more of living in the real world as opposed to living in the online world, that can be a really helpful thing. And then you work your way up to being more open and doing different things. Some of the other things that you can do is just acknowledge your feelings. As we heard from Rachel, it is not unusual to feel lonely. People often think that they're the only ones, but there are so many people feeling lonely, and acknowledging your feelings, that's the first step toward making a change in your life. It's going to really help you be happier and decrease your dementia risk. It's really important to practice self-care. This is especially important for people who may be caregivers. That's another risk factor for dementia. For example, in that case, the risk of dementia for somebody who is a caregiver for a loved one, a spouse living with dementia, can be up to 6 times greater than someone who's not a caregiver. And it's not because it's contagious. It's because if you are taking care of someone else, you often don't kind of remember to take care of yourself. So, one of the things that you can do, for example, is if you are taking care of somebody living with dementia at home, look in your community and see, is there a dementia daycare program, right? And the reason we mention that in particular is because it helps both you and the person for whom you're caring. One of my grandmothers, both of my grandmothers died with dementia, but one of them ended up toward the end of her life going into one of these daycare programs. And it was amazing, the results that she saw, both for herself. She was happier. She had a really happy last few years of her life with lots of friends and lots of activities, and her cognitive decline actually slowed. And, my aunt and uncle, who were so generous in taking care of her, they had more time for themselves as well. So everybody benefits. And sometimes there's even self-help groups and support groups of the caregivers associated with this kind of daycare center. So even if someone's living at home with you and you're taking care of that person, there are things that you can do to give yourself and that person a better social experience. But most importantly, just practice self-care. Make sure that you're doing things for yourself. If you take care of yourself, you can take care of others better. If you do have extra time, you can always join different kinds of communities, like the one that I mentioned that Myrna Norman has started, or just any kind of community. So I've done things like I'm in a band, for example, and Jay is as well. And we always debate whose band is better. Mine is, obviously, because he's not here, so I can say that. But being part of a band, it gives you, an activity that you can take part in, but you're also socializing and interacting with different people. My husband plays basketball. I do theater. I mean, so there's all these different kinds of things you can do. Figure out where your passion is and join a community that helps to support that, or you can volunteer in the community. There's so many different things that you can do to be able to take control of your own life and to actively work to decrease any feelings of loneliness and to improve your social interactions. The other thing that's really important is to make sure that we have a baseline for what our brain health is like. And to explain what I mean about that and how you can check your own brain health baseline, I'm going to turn it over to Larissa now to tell us a little bit more about cognicity. So Larissa, over to you.
Thank you, Allison. So hello, everyone. I would like to tell you a little bit more about our free online brain health assessment, and it can be taken by anyone on the cognicity.com site. Now, you can think of the Cognicity Brain Health Assessment as a blood pressure cuff for the brain to help answer the question, is my memory normal, or should I follow up with a doctor if experiencing any memory concerns? Now, if you'd like to take the test, the first step is to go on the cognicity.com site in any web browser on a computer or a laptop. I know if this is your first time, you would create an account by clicking on the login button on the very top right of the screen, and then click on create an account. And once you complete filling out those sections, you would then click on take the assessment and follow the instructions provided. There are some test requirements, like giving yourself about 20 minutes to complete the test without being distracted, like pausing or checking for emails, and ensuring that you are in a quiet room and giving it your best effort. and not taking the test if you are feeling stressed or anxious, and giving yourself enough time to complete it and making sure that you're not feeling tired or unwell. So once you read through the test requirements, you can then click on Begin the Assessment and fill out the questionnaire that's asked, and then follow the instructions on how to complete the 4 different cognitive tasks that are asked within the brain health assessment. And once you complete it, again, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes on average, you will get a personalized report, which includes a brain health score from 0 to 100, with an interpretation of what the score means and suggested next steps. Now, anyone can take the test. It has been validated for ages 20 to 94, so anyone within that age range currently will get a report. And during the test, you'll be asked for demographic and health questionnaires and complete the cognitive test. Now, what's nice about this test also is that there is a practice test to complete, so you have enough time to understand what's being asked of you. And one last thing about the brain health assessment, there are 4 different versions of the test to limit any practice effects, and we do ask you to complete it every 6 months to a year. We also have something on our website called the Smart Tracker tool. It's also on the cognicity.com site, and it's a 5-minute lifestyle questionnaire. And it asks you questions a little bit about your lifestyle choices and provides recommendations on where to improve on. The Smart Tracker is very easy to fill out. It asks questions on diet, your exercise, your cognitive social engagement, sleep, emotional and physical well-being. And at the end, you get research-based recommendations on how to help improve your lifestyle choices. Now, we recommend also to take the Smart Tracker tool and the brain health assessment every 6 months to optimize your brain health and overall health. So thank you.
Thanks, Larissa. If you can just maybe say a little bit about why you're recommending it every 6 months. People might not know why. And the one thing I do have to say is, you know, in the past, people might have said, well, I don't want to know if I have a problem because there's nothing you can do about it. Hopefully what you're learning today is that there is something that you can do. If you know that you may be having a change in your capacity, your cognitive capacity, there are different actions that you can take. And how does this tool help you track that?
So the brain health assessment, the Smart Tracker tool are great resources because it can alleviate that worry that you might have about, oh, I don't know how my memory is functioning. You know, I forgot that person's name that I just met. Is this due to normal aging or not? So having that baseline and reassessing yourself every 6 months to a year sort of can give you that reassurance on keeping track of where you are. And the Smart Tracker tool is really nice because it gives you a graph, and you want to go from red to green, and sort of gives you that motivation to keep improving on all the lifestyle choices, which is also related to your brain health and all the great stuff that you learned today about dementia prevention and modifiable risk factors. So it's a great way to keep track of it.
Right. And neurologists are actually recommending anyone over 65, we should be checking in with our brain health on a regular basis, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And 6 months is about a good amount of time to see if there are any changes. It's not usually, unless it's a result of a stroke or something, it typically doesn't happen overnight. It takes a little bit of time. So 6 months is enough time to be able to sort of see, is there a change? And so I take this every 6 months just to check in and see how I'm doing. And if I start to see a decline, right, then I know I should go and talk to my doctor, and I can bring the information from that Smart Tracker with me. And if these were my results, I could say, oh, you know what? I'm most worried about my social isolation in this case, because that's where I'm scoring the worst. And so maybe that's where, where do you start in terms of all of these different lifestyle factors? Maybe that's where I want to start. But then also the doctor can look to see, are there any other changes that might be happening in your body that need to be addressed? Because sometimes it may be that, you have a decline in your cognitive ability, but it might have nothing to do with dementia. So for example, my daughter, last year was really worried what was happening to her memory and her concentration. It turned out she had a vitamin B12 deficiency. And so once they treated that, she just had to take some supplements. She's fine now, right? And so, there can be things, whether it's a B12 deficit, whether it's depression, whether it's another kind of infection, other sorts of things may be influencing your cognitive ability. And so keeping track of it, if you know what your baseline is and you start to see it going down, it's really important to get to your doctor as soon as possible to get checked out and see what might that reason be. And if it is something that looks like you might be headed in the direction of mild cognitive impairment, there are things that we can do now to change your lifestyle to reduce your risk. So thank you very much, Larissa, for that. I did mention before caregivers and the special risk that caregivers have. Again, just because you're a caregiver does not mean that you will develop dementia. And especially if you're armed with the knowledge that we're sharing with you today, you know that there's a lot of different things that you can do to reduce your risk. And interestingly, one of the things that you can do is find other people to help you. And so I'm going to turn it over to Adriana to tell us a little bit about the Canadian Caregiver Assessment Resource Tool, or CCART. So Adriana, over to you.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thank you, everybody. So I want to share with you this very exciting, we call it a tool, but it's really a way for ourselves to find help. And this was initially developed for family caregivers, but the truth is anybody could use it, because one of the #1 worries and concerns for Canadians is their inability to find help. So even though there's help available for them, that does not mean that we know where to get the help from. So through this questionnaire, it's a series of 15 questions, it will help you get the supports you need or link you to it, and also for the person you care for if that's your situation. So I'm just going to show you an example. And so, for example, the first few questions are questions about the demographics. So the person that I care for, say it's my father who's 65 and older. So it's my parent, or what, doesn't matter. Tell us about the person lives in a retirement home, say they live in Ontario, in an urban area, and the person I care for is not a veteran. Does the person, no, the person's not Indigenous. And what are the conditions? So he has anxiety, he has depression and dementia, and actually diabetes as well. I'm a bit concerned that I don't know much about long-term care. He's in a retirement home, but long-term care is the next level of care, so I want to find out more about it. And I also would like to know about advanced care planning. In terms of where can I get help? What are some of the barriers that I have in getting help? First of all, I don't even know where to go to get help. There's also, it's a big financial cost when you support somebody. So I'd like to find some financial resources. There's also really long waiting lists for long-term care. And services are not provided in a language I speak. Generally, when I don't know about my condition, I go to the family doctor and I use the internet and social media. We know, like Allison said, self-care is very important for all of us, but especially for caregivers. And really, I don't have much time. So I would say I rarely take time for self-care. The other thing is caregivers, a lot of them tend to suffer from depression. And of course, it's sometimes a difficult situation. Having said that, we still need treatment for it. It doesn't matter why the reason of our depression or what's causing it, but we still would benefit from support. And really, several days I'm feeling down and depressed. I often have financial concerns, and it does affect my employment. And I had to reduce my work hours. So these are just some questions so that we have an idea of who's using this questionnaire. And I'm prefer not to answer, that's fine. What is my employment? I'm employed. And so after completing these questions, this will lead me to resources that I can link into. And if I had to tell you anything, if you know nothing else, every province in Canada has a 211, which is accessible in over 150 languages. It's available 24/7, and you can ask any questions related to support. 811 is a medical version of that. 5 of our provinces have caregiver organizations. It also links you to different financial resources because I said that I'm having some financial difficulties. And then to get information, it gives you different resources based on what I chose. And then there's, because I said I want help with advanced care planning, you'll link me to that. And there's various resources that pop up. And so in a nutshell, this is what we call it C-Cart. By the end of March, we will have an application built already, which will be a lot more user-friendly for people. And we will also be developing a French version and a C-Cart that's very specific for those caregivers of people living with dementia. And with that, I'll pass it over to Allison.
Thanks so much, Adriana. One question for you. If somebody has additional resources that they know about that they think might be added, how do they let you know about that?
They can send it to an email. We'll put it in the link. We have our own email address, so I will ask Kat to add it to the link.
Okay. And I just want to highlight for people that, the work that we're doing, it's thanks to obviously the great minds of people, like Rachel and Joanne and Larissa and Adriana, but it can't be done without the support of our sponsors. So both the C-Cart approach, as well as Cognicity, the brain health assessment, as well as Defy Dementia, we're all part of the funding that was provided by the Slate Family Foundation. So I just want to say thank you again to the Slate Family Foundation for supporting all of these different activities that are meant to help people live longer and live better. One of the other things that we have been able to do in the past, building on the work of, say, Defy Dementia, is to collaborate with a lot of other people as well. We've had a lot of pleasure in collaborating with people in creating the podcast and in creating all these other sorts of activities. But one of the most fun times we had was collaborating with a group to create a game that is called Kanoku Brain Health Edition. So people who may have played a game called Sudoku may see the similarities here. That's a number game where you have to sort of say, well, it's like in this case, there might be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and each row in each column can only have one of those numbers once, and each of the 4 quadrants can have each of those. What we did was we partnered with a brilliant and creative team in Ottawa who had already created one game based on Wordle, which is a Canadian version of Wordle that they called Canuckle. And it's really based on Canadian sorts of words. And then they also created a Canadian version of Sudoku. And it uses icons instead of numbers. And so in this case, what we did was we said, well, you know what? The different kinds of risks that we see for brain health also can be represented by icons. So you see in this case, just a few of them. You see brain for cognitive engagement. You see a bed for sleep. You see a bicep for exercise. And of course, we do have a Canadian flag because it's a Canadian game. And so instead of playing with numbers, in this case, you play with these icons. And you can have it set in a way that's really easy. So if you want to play with your grandkids and they're not very good at this game, or even someone with, early Alzheimer's, we would be able to play the games together Or you can use it with more complicated kinds of approaches. So this is a 4x4. You can also, if you click on it, you'll see that there's 4x4, 6x6, 9x9, and each of them every single day has 5 different versions, all the way from beginner to expert. So in this case, if we have the 4x4 beginner, this is the easiest one. And the way it works is if you just see in this case where the arrow is, there's one icon that's missing from that quadrant. And if people want to guess ahead what time, what it might be, you click on it and then you say, that must be the Canadian flag because that's the only one that's missing there. So then you click there on the Canadian flag and it lights it up. Now, if you go across the bottom, you can say, I see a bicep, a flag, a brain, and I'm missing a bed. So I'm going to then click on the bed. And now if I go up, it's bed, bicep, brain, up, 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 up. There, yep. Bed, bicep, brain, and then flag. So you know that one is, and then you can fill in the others as well. So I think we've got Katrina filling in all of these while I'm speaking, and it's really fun. And what the thing I love about it is that you're exercising your brain while you're learning about how to exercise your brain. So you're reducing your risk for potentially reducing your risk for dementia while you're learning about how to reduce your risk for dementia. Kat, if you can maybe just go to the 9x9 and we can show a more fulsome range of the go to the 9x9, anyone. And you'll see at the bottom there, if you look at the icons on the bottom, you'll see some of the risk factors that we've talked about on the Defy Dementia podcast, including from left to right, you've got cognitive engagement, you've got exercise, you've got sleep, Canadian flag, and you've got social engagement, which is what we're talking about today. You've got, those are blueberries for nutrition. Hearing is an ear, vision is an eye. And then that last one, people often wonder, what is that? That's meant to represent air pollution. So it's a lot of fun. And again, we'll put the link to that in the chat for you. We want to take a little bit of a break now. Before we do, I have one quick question for Larissa, which came from the audience. And that question is that you had mentioned that there are 4 different versions of the test. And the question is whether the system automatically knows which version you've done and it provides you a different version. So Larissa, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, of course. So when you register for an account and you log in, every time you take the assessment, a new version will be given. So it tracks what version was provided earlier. And great question.
Okay. And if we'll put into the chat, I think, the link for the Knuckle game, the Kanoku game. So I think that some people are asking, where do they find that? And you can use it on your phone. You can use it on your computer. You can use it anywhere. I have friends who play every single version, all 5 versions, every single day. And it's great. It's great fun and it's great for your brain health. So let's take a break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at 4:25. And at that point, what we're going to do is have some Q&A. And remember the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you've got questions, type them in there and we'll be sure we get to as many as we can. So we'll see you back here at 4:25. Oh, welcome back. I think we've got a couple, let's see, Joanne, Rachel, are you back? There's Rachel. And Joanne, great. So welcome back, everybody. And Rachel and Joanne, if you want to unmute yourselves, we can start having a little bit of a chat here. People haven't had a chance to hear yet from Joanne, so I want to maybe start with a couple of questions for you. And reminder to everybody, please put your questions into the Q&A. And then after some introductory questions and discussion that we have, we'll turn to those questions. And I did notice that at least one person's got their hand raised on Zoom. If you've got a technical question, please put that into the chat. And if you've got a question for our panelists, just let me know through the Q&A what that question would be. So Joanne, just starting with you, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background?
I am a retired principal, and I have a bachelor's degree, of course, and a master's degree, and I'm a lifelong learner. I believe in never stopping. Some people don't understand that, but I think for your own mental health, it's the best thing to do. So consequently, I have found myself involved in many different types of committees. I used to golf, but all of my golf mates either aren't able to golf for various reasons. And then I had some surgery that prevented me from golfing, so I lost that. So I picked up a lot of other things to do to keep me busy. I love to read, and I do a crossword puzzle every day. I do a Sudoku every day. And I believe in keeping your mind healthy. I talk to people that I don't know. I say hello to every person who waits on me in a store. I ask them how things are going. If somebody ahead of me has been kind of miserable, I will acknowledge that to the person and tell them that they've handled the situation very well. I believe people are the answer to a lot of things, other people. And that thought was confirmed a few weeks ago in the Globe and Mail, where there was an article on being happy. And being happy means being with people. So that's me.
And we have another episode that's come out on wellness, which is also around that feeling of happiness and satisfaction with life. So people are interested more about that, they can take a look, listen to that episode as well. Joanne, how have you engaged with loneliness and social isolation through your work?
I have, through my work, I've met a lot of different people. I've worked quite well with someone at the Alzheimer's Society, and we've presented together on abuse mainly, but dementia too, because I do believe that people with beginning stages of dementia are at a risk from other people who think that they need to start controlling lives. And although I know that sometimes dangerous things happen, I think you have to allow the person some personal freedom. And people who use that excuse, well, I'm just protecting them, often aren't telling the truth. And someone I know told me that his father committed suicide because his daughter-in-law was so overprotective and limited his ability to socialize with other people.
Wow.
And I thought that is absolutely horrible that could happen. And I would do anything I am possibly able to do to help somebody with dementia or to make sure to help protect them. Now, I'm kind of old to say I would do anything, because certainly I'm limited into what I can do, but there are resources I can call on. And one other thing that I need to mention, and I hope it's okay with you, but at the RTO, organization, I was provincial president. And during my tenure was the time that we decided that we should do more for our members. And we raised money to establish a chair in geriatrics at the University of Toronto. And eventually, Dr. Paula Rochon was the one who was awarded that position. And it is through her that I met Rachel and a lot of other really super terrific people. And right now, Dr. Rochon, and of course, Rachel is involved in this, has a big research project going on in Barrie. And it's called the NORC Project. And NORC, do you know what NORC is?
Naturally occurring retirement communities.
Yes. And I think it is so critical right now because we have an aging population, and I live in a building that could fit that, except we don't have the kind of services that are being provided in Barrie. And I think it's an important thing for people that age to know that there are other people with the same kinds of problems and not just keep themselves isolated in their own apartment or unit and not find out that people, what is the song that Barbara Streisand sang? People need people, or I don't think that's exactly the line, but that's really, I enjoyed this kind of work with people like Rachel and Paula.
Great.
And
maybe we can follow up a little bit more on the NORCs maybe in a little bit.
okay.
What just a follow up for you though, Joanne, in terms of your experience and your perspective, you mentioned, folks maybe not having the ability to play golf anymore, and you mentioned, changes in the way people are, the circumstances that they're living. How do you think loneliness and social isolation manifests itself among individuals making major life changes like retiring from your job and so on? What's your thought on that?
For some people, retiring from their job means freedom, but for others, it means loneliness because they have nothing except their job. And I've never really believed in that because my job was really critical for me, but I had another life. A lot of people retire and they don't have another life.
Yeah.
So I think it's important when you're an active worker that you have other interests and that you take part in other activities where, and this was mentioned previously, where you're meeting different people. I sang in a community chorale for years, and most of the people in that chorale were not teachers or principals or educators, period. And I sang in that choir for 30 years until a pandemic hit. We had lots of special times. We sang with Frank Mills. I don't know if you remember the Music Box Dancer. You're probably too young. And a couple other really big singers. And it was a learning experience. It was a very interesting experience because we all think that you get to rehearse like lots of times, and that doesn't ever happen. You don't see the performer until you're on the stage with them. So, I've had lots of different experiences, and I think it's because my job was my job, but the rest of my life was my life. And I think people need to make use of that time. So I'm not alone. I'm really not lonely. I have too many things to do. So
that's a good problem to have. And I think that's one good piece of advice, to have that work-life balance so that when you do retire, there's more that you can be doing. And honestly, that's one reason I started drumming. It's one reason I got back into theater and things like that, because it brings you the community. And as my kids were going off to university or, moving out of the house for jobs, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do, to fill my time? And how do I make sure that I'm still staying engaged? So being really, directed about that is a great bit of advice. Joanne, is there any other bit of advice that you would have, a key piece of advice that you would like our audience to know, should they or people in their lives face loneliness or social isolation?
Well, I think you have to get out of your space. You have to go, and sometimes you need somebody to make you go. I have two friends who are so opposite in their lives that I just find it unreal. One friend, and they retired at the same time. They were teachers. One friend said to her children, "I'm going to be retired, but that doesn't mean you've got a built-in babysitter. You have to schedule your time with me, and if I can take the kids or if I am available, I will help out. But I want you to know that it's my time, and just because I'm retired, it doesn't mean it's your time." The other one said, "I'm going to be here all the time. Whenever you need me, I will be here." The one who said, "My time," she's active, she has friends, she does things, she goes away a lot. The other one, she's lonesome. And I asked her, I played bridge with her yesterday. I said, "So have you been out of the house lately?" "Oh no, I have to stay home." I said, "What for? Your grandkids are all grown up." "Well, I told them that, I'm available." And I
Oh,
thought, uh, so the brain, the brain is operating there. And I honestly feel she has the beginning stages of dementia. Um, what do you do? I just said to her, "You know what? You need to get out now. Let's do something tomorrow."
oh, yeah.
"Oh, I can't do it tomorrow because maybe so and so might want to come over with a new baby."
Oh,
So, I think you've got to be the one calling the um, times that people can use you, because she's being used by her kids, and I don't think that's right.
yeah. Oh, it's very good advice. Rachel, I want to turn it over to you. You talked about loneliness and social isolation and highlighted for us that it's not uncommon. And we did highlight that the risk for dementia can increase for people who are feeling loneliness and social isolation. What is the link between loneliness, social isolation, and dementia? I mean, clearly being lonely doesn't mean that you will end up with dementia, but what is the link?
Yeah, so people that are lonely and isolated can, as Joanne was describing, become more withdrawn. And I really liked your story earlier, Allison, about the woman with dementia who described it as cocooning herself. And this is pretty common when you go through, as Joanne said, like substantial life transitions like retirement. Sometimes you kind of withdraw just to sort of process what's going on, protect yourself from things that are happening in the outside world that maybe aren't controllable, but then find you're actually exacerbating the problem because you're not with people that can support you. And so really by withdrawing socially, it can it can increase your risk for dementia because you're lacking that social engagement and the cognitive stimulation that comes with interacting with others and being with others. Another thing, on the pathway is when you're lonely and isolated, you're less likely to engage in healthy behaviors. So when you showed the puzzle of all the modifiable risk factors, like Joanne said, it's harder to do things without someone sometimes dragging you along and encouraging you to do it. So you're less likely to be physically active if you don't have someone to exercise with or go for a walk with. You're less likely to make yourself a nutritious meal, for example, if you're living alone. Whereas if you invite someone over, you're probably more likely to put together a well-rounded meal and sit down and enjoy it and enjoy the company of others. So simply put, you're able to engage and make healthier choices when you're in the company of others that are also excited about those healthy lifestyle choices too. And then I think you've probably talked about it on some of your earlier programs, but also loneliness and social isolation can be on the causal pathway between hearing loss and dementia as well. And
Right.
so sometimes there's a need to treat some underlying medical conditions that might be contributing to social isolation and loneliness in order to prevent future dementia risk.
Yeah, I saw that with one of my grandmothers, my mom's mom, who she developed a vision problem, and she lived in New York City at the time. And people who don't know, all of the money was and still is green there. And so if you've got low vision, it's kind of hard to tell how many ones do I have, how many fives, and so on. So she started getting ripped off when she was going shopping, and then she sort of stopped trusting people, all because she couldn't
Yeah.
see. And then she couldn't go to work anymore, and she didn't go out anymore. So the vision problem in that case like led to her social isolation, and then we saw a very rapid, she was, I think, on the road toward decline anyway, but I think it just
Yeah.
sort of accelerated. Is that what you've got in mind in terms of that interconnection?
Yeah, and loneliness often can set off what they call this downward spiral, where the feeling of being alone or experiencing loneliness can actually be a good thing for our bodies, or being temporarily isolated, because we're social beings, we're meant to be around others. And so when we feel that emotion, it's actually our body just triggering us to connect with others. Just like when we're thirsty, it's a signal to our brains and our bodies that we need to have something to drink, so that we can continue on and thrive. And so in small doses, like feeling lonely is actually good for us. But if we're not acting on those emotions to connect with others, then we can become lonely in a more chronic or prolonged
Right.
way. And that's really the state that we want to try to avoid, because that is what is linked with all of those negative health outcomes you were talking about earlier, and with dementia risk, that chronic loneliness and chronic isolation. So when you start to feel those emotions, it can be really easy to get sucked into more thoughts of negativity, despair. And the further you fall down, the harder it is to come back out and sort of see the world the same way, that people want to be around you, that you're likable, that you have something to contribute, and that you want to engage with others. And so sometimes people, when they're lonely or isolated for a long period of time, need some psychological support, to actually help them reestablish some of their connections
Right.
and friendships, unfortunately. So I think, it's important to feel the emotions, but then it's also important to act on them. And I think it can be really scary to acknowledge that you feel lonely to others. But people want to help, like Joanne said.
Yeah.
If her friend said to her, "I feel lonely," Joanne would be there, to offer a helping hand and invite her to things. And so I think we all need to be thinking about how we can make that easier for people if we know people in our lives that we think might be
Right.
lonely or isolated, to be a good listener, to invite them out, to check in on them,
Yeah.
and create that safe space for them to share how they're feeling.
I think we all want to have Joanne for a friend.
Yeah.
That's really clear. One question that has come up every single time that I've been doing discussions around loneliness and social isolation. Invariably, there's somebody, often someone from my family, who will ask, well, what if you just don't like really being around people that much? What if you are an introvert?
Yeah.
Do you have to be out and around people? Or if you're perfectly content being alone, is that a problem? So that comes up all the time. I'm wondering, Rachel, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, not necessarily. So my dad is like this. He is perfectly content, on his own. And actually, the longer I visit with him, the more I can tell he's ready to return to his alone time once I'm gone, even though I know he loves me and loves to spend time with me. So I think some people, personality types are really important to this experience, where some people just feel very content with their own, being on their own and being alone, solitude, going for long walks in the woods by themselves, noticing nature. Like all of those things can really help, bring a sense of calm, peace, happiness, and really ward off some of those feelings of loneliness. So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, maybe from that perspective. But I think, most people will say, even those that like to be alone, that they feel really good once they see people and talk to people. And I think we even learned this during the pandemic that
Yeah.
seeing people online still helps, but it's not the same as being in person and having a hug and watching someone's face light up or sharing some food with each other and things like that. So I know it can feel hard to get there and to physically be with some people sometimes, especially in these cold winter months. But just try to remember that really good feeling you have once you've seen a great friend or a family member that really can push you out of your comfort zone to connect with others.
Yeah, that brings us to some of the questions that we've been asked by the audience from Joanne and then Rachel. So if you have a last word of advice for the audience around what can people do to decrease their dementia risk by addressing issues of loneliness and social isolation, what would that one critical piece of advice be? First, Joanne, to you, and then Rachel. You're on mute. It's hard to be social if you can't.
Don't be on mute. Talk to people every day. Get out and talk.
Get out and talk. Great advice. Rachel?
Yeah, I would just echo that and say that I think, again, you might feel nervous to share that you feel alone, even when you know you have lots of support and people around you. But that's kind of the first step to making sure that your social needs are met and people genuinely want to help. Sometimes people feel more comfortable too sharing those things to someone outside of their family. So maybe if you have a trusting relationship with your family doctor or another healthcare provider, that would be a good start. And I think this program is focused on some of the modifiable risk factors. I think one of the things that's really exciting about this topic area is it's in our power to change. And so not to look at it as something that you have to live with, that there are opportunities to connect with others and to end some of the negative feelings that you're experiencing.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. And I want to just draw final attention to the viewers that we've put the links that we've discussed in the webinar in the chat, and you can also expect an additional email in the coming days that shares some of those resources with you. And don't forget to check out Defy Dementia. It's just defydementia.org, and you can get a whole bunch of resources there. You're going to see an evaluation popping up at the end of the webinar, and you'll also be emailed that. So we'd ask that you fill it out. So let us know what else you'd like to hear about and what we could do to improve your experiences here. And we're going to share those additional resources, as I said, with the registered email that you used for today's event. So if that's not the right one, please let us know as soon as possible. The next Defy Dementia virtual event is going to be February 24th. So we hope to see you all there, and please tell your friends. And I just want to say some final thank yous. Obviously, Rachel and Joanne, thank you for a terrific discussion. I certainly learned a lot and would really appreciated all of your insights. Thank you also to Adriana and Larissa. And thank you to the whole Defy Dementia team, including my co-host, Jay Ingram, and especially to Roseanne Aliang, Katerina Nemethy, Sylvain Dubois, and Sophie Boisvat-Heron, who are all with us here today, coordinating behind the scenes to make sure the event goes as smoothly as possible. And finally, thank you to all of you for hanging in there with us, listening, and hopefully learning along with us today. Thank you very much.